Welcome to the Jobs for the Future Candid Conversation series. I am Kristina Francis, Executive Director for Jobs for the Future Labs, and I'm here today with Joe Speicher, Executive Director of Autodesk Foundation. Joe, it's so great to meet you and share this time with you today.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. Excited for the conversation.
Absolutely. So Joe, it's interesting. JFF and Autodesk have something in common, I've just learned. Both organizations are approaching their 40th birthday. I remember when I was approaching my 40th birthday. It's interesting because Autodesk was one of the original tech companies in Silicon Valley. And I think that's so amazing. How would you say the industry has matured, and what experience informed the goals of the Autodesk Foundation?
Oh boy. So I'll parse those two questions: the industry maturing, and I would say the technology industry writ large, and then how did that inform our foundation, or what are our foundation priorities? It's really interesting thinking about the history of the technology sector writ large and the various forces that came to influence the Bay Area and Silicon Valley as a tech center. What I think is wonderful about Autodesk is we given our age, we remember our roots before everything changed. I think in the 90s, at the advent of Google, and then in the 2000s, Facebook, et cetera. We have that long history, and so we can think about the time horizon in a bit of a different context than maybe some of our peers do. We're also an enterprise company, so we solve problems for customers who are engineers and architects and whatnot. So that gives us a bit of a different orientation as well, as opposed to kind of the more retail focus of companies like Apple and Netflix, et cetera. And I think that allows us to bring a lot of heft and weight to some of these bigger issues that, to your second question, inform our philanthropic strategy. So our foundation, the philanthropic arm of Autodesk, was created in 2013, and I was brought on this following year to lead this initiative. And our first order of business was, how do we set up a corporate philanthropy that leverages the core competencies of the business? There's lots of corporate CSR initiatives that are firewalled from the business, and I think that that's a huge mistake. The inability to leverage the corporate value proposition to enable societal value, impact, whatever you want to call it, is huge. And there's a couple of examples that are a little bit cliched, but I think are instructive. You think about Henry Ford setting the minimum wage so that all of his employees can afford cars. That was a huge had huge social implications. Same for Tesla. Tesla is a company, everybody loves to point to them as an exemplar. I think what's most interesting about Tesla is that they cleared the way for every other automotive company to transition to electrification at speed. So whatever happens to Tesla in the long history of the automotive sector, it will be the influence that they had outside of their own four walls. And so I think that corporate philanthropy can have impacts like that if deliberate and focused in those areas. And so those are the considerations we made when starting our foundation 7 years ago, which is much, much younger than our corporation of 40 years.
Yeah, no, so many different ways we can go in this conversation. So I'm going to start though with that, launching Autodesk Foundations about 7 years ago, 2013, as a philanthropic vehicle. It's interesting because, again, another comparison is JFF Labs was launched 3 years ago to help JFF continue to realize its mission of economic advancement for all, by infusing technology and new models and capital into our solution. So first, we thank Autodesk for being an anchor funder for JFF Labs. And I wonder if you want to share why you funded JFF and what value you thought JFF brought, and what value you know now that JFF can bring to the industry.
Yeah, thanks. It's a wonderful reason to celebrate our engagement with JFF, and I love to do so. I'll start with a little bit of context, and Kristina, and just say that we we started with the premise, okay, how do we leverage our core competencies of design and engineering to add societal value? And where that originally manifests was in the application of engineering technologies um, that, for all intents and purposes, led to social impact. And examples of this, there's many of them in the global South, but lots of them were, agricultural enhancing products in sub-Saharan Africa, and water and sanitation innovations in the Indian subcontinent. Um, and we learned that we could actually add a lot of value through our corporate value proposition by helping our foundation customers, we call them, solve some of their technology challenges. And so we expanded that into the low carbon space to focus on climate change. And then around the time that JFF Labs was starting, we decided to expand that into workforce development. We had kind of answered these two questions around, okay, how do we address climate change and the need to be, resilient in the face of a changing climate through design and engineering tools? That is only in service of people, right? And as we looked at the changing labor markets and the advent of automation technology and its impact on labor markets, we said we have to get out ahead of this, and started looking around for solutions to help us address this problem. And obviously, JFF immediately rose to the fore, and specifically JFF Labs, which was created, I believe, to kind of house some of this more kind of innovative, forward-thinking initiatives around transitioning, the workforce. And so it was a very happy marriage. We were, it was a partnership that we didn't have to debate very much to get into. And what we were looking for, and I'll say this very explicitly, was an organization to help us be a good funder in this space. JFF had the networks, had the expertise, and had the history of what was happening, and that informed where things were going. And so we felt the value that we've derived, to the second part of your question, is we feel like we've had somebody come and kind of take our hand and say, here are the opportunities that are available to you. How can we help them? How can we help you connect to these and add value from where you see your value prop? And so we've gone out and done that. I think JFF has introduced us to many of our subsequent grantees and investees. We also invest dollars in this space through this partnership. So we feel great about working with JFF, and the gratitude for helping us plot our direction in this area has been incredibly valuable.
And I would say, likewise, just, what I've been with JFF Labs now for 6 months, and having an anchor partner to believe in the mission and to support as we were growing was just tremendous. And you continue to be a great partner. So thank you for that. One of the things you brought up just around corporate philanthropy, I'd love to dive a little bit more into that, because I'm really fascinated by the opportunity we have right now and really the promise of corporate philanthropy as we are looking at recovery and acceleration, particularly post-pandemic, and also as
Mm.
we address the rising inequality issues, political instability, climate change. And historically, philanthropy has focused on policy and advocacy. We're now starting to look more at design and engineering and entrepreneurship, startups. And, as Autodesk plays a role as an LP making direct investments, I'm curious, one, on some of the investments that you've made that you'd like to share, but then also, what do you see on the horizon? What trends are exciting you right now?
Uh, oh, there's a lot in that question. So I uh, I think that the opportunity for corporate philanthropy, and well, actually, let me address your policy and advocacy
Mhm.
comment, because I can't help myself. Apologies.
Okay.
I think that those are very risky investments, whether they're on the future of work side, if you will, or workforce development side, or they're on the climate side. We saw with one U.S. election a radical reversal of U.S. climate policy that is now reversed once again. And so I think that riskiness combined with um, the public sector to a certain extent abdicating their role in driving towards societal outcomes means that the private sector has to step in more. I think that that's one of the reasons why we see the rise of impact investing. Investors are saying, man, if this investment continues to destroy the climate or continues to uh, uh, solidify inequality, that's a problem for us in the long term. So we need to start looking at other outcomes from these investments. And so it's a little bit controversial, but and I hope that it's changing. But I think that the private sector has jumped into the space and the corporate sector more specifically in order to address the lack of um, leadership on the public sector. So sorry, full stop. Um, the trends in the space and the interesting things that were happening, it's hard to talk about, Christina, without mentioning kind of the outputs that we like to see in the space.
Mhm.
And those are very specifically as it relates to workforce development,
Mhm.
that is job placements
Mhm.
and wage increases. And so we look very specifically for opportunities to invest in proven models or at least piloted models to be able to do some of this work. One of our current favorite investments is Merit America.
Mhm.
They've demonstrated that they are able to put folks into uh, programs that are in growth areas from a labor market perspective and place them in jobs and get them wage increases. It's too early to say whether those are sustained wage increases, but we fully hope so and anticipate that to be the case. Um, and you know, this is also you asked about what's in the future. As I mentioned, we're a funder and investor in the climate change space,
Mhm.
as well as workforce. And I think the overlap of these two things is really interesting.
Yeah.
I've only recently started to dive into a report called Rewiring America,
Mhm.
which is about basically the overlap of, the the economic transition that we need to address climate change is great from a jobs and workforce development perspective, and we need to see these things as flip sides of the same coin. And so I think that there's a lot there. Um, Again, that's not the be all end all, but I think that is a when we think about the wholesale transformation of our economy to a low carbon future, um, if you can align that with jobs and workforce development, it seems like 1 plus 1 might equal 3 if we can do
Mhm.
it correctly.
That actually reminds me of an investment that our employment technology fund recently made with Charger Help. And so they are an electric vehicle charging station company, but they
Yeah,
have a workforce component, and so to your point, we're seeing a lot of intersectionality within
yeah,
companies right now. I'm really excited about how that can change, to your point on what Tesla did, kind of societal norms as we go forward. But I want to
yeah.
hit on something that you mentioned just around risk and innovation, right? And we're talking about policy and advocacy, but I'm curious because of where we are in society, we are going to have to take more risk, and particularly philanthropy is going to have to take more risk. How do you think philanthropy can de-risk innovation right now? Do you think that it's possible?
I actually, I'll say something also controversial. I think it's one of the only best uses of philanthropy is to de-risk things. It's a little bit more expensive than just innovation and technology, but I actually think, and I'm going to get in trouble for saying this because this is recorded, I think philanthropy can be a bad thing for us as a society to allow individuals and companies to opt out of paying taxes and then decide where they want to allocate funds to the social agenda that they are not accountable to. Um, only by the, you know, uh, only by the his own internal desire to be a good person and maybe some um, uh, reputational considerations is Bill Gates writing checks for positive things. In philanthropy. this is also a little controversial, but the only regulation that comes from the IRS is don't enrich anybody. But really, the point of philanthropy is actually to deliver societal value. We're not held to that standard, but we do it anyway, or at least we try to do so. Um, Again, this is all very controversial. In the comments section of wherever this is posted, please don't post my email. Uh, I,
I'll put
but
my email. I'll put my email. I'll take this one.
sorry. No, well, we can. Um, I'll take the hit as well. I'm willing to say that on record because I think it's important to note. I think that we should rethink how we regulate philanthropy. For folks who care about this stuff, I would advocate the book Just Giving. I think it's a really important book for thinking about the future of philanthropy. Um, but I think that the way to square that circle, the way that philanthropy can be value additive to society, is to de-risk things that the public sector or the private sector is unwilling or incapable of investing in today. And so we do that from a technology perspective, and we talk to downstream partners to say, if we de-risk this technology and we get it to the stage where it might be scalable, would this be an investment that you would consider? Because it's really important to ensure that that we are paving the way for the public and the private sector engines to do their thing, right? One example that I frequently think about is photovoltaics. Originally this was funded through research, which was originally philanthropic research, and now the name of the game is it's fully private markets. How do we expand solar capacity around the U.S., right? Um, and so bringing that analogy to workforce development, there's a lot of really innovative, interesting programs to upskill and reskill workers. Um, Corporations looking at this say, "Oh, I don't know what the ROI is. I'm not willing to invest in that yet." And name your municipality or Department of Labor. They've got 17 other priorities instead of as opposed to investing in technologies that can help folks reskill. It hasn't yet proven. And so the ability to demonstrate proof of concept for these kind of bigger players that are downstream is a way to make philanthropy much more impactful.
Ooh, so much in there. So there's two points. One, you all just came out with a report with Zinc VC, and there's a line in there that talks about creative destruction and creative destruction being necessary for economic growth. And I'm paraphrasing, getting rid of the old ways to create new ones. And so what you just mentioned, just in terms of philanthropy, is really should be really de-risking opportunity for growth and change, I think is a really powerful one. So you and I can take the hit on that one together.
Thank you, Christine. I
but
appreciate that.
but I'm curious on, just measuring impact, and as a funder or an investor and looking at some of these new models and kind of that intersectional point that we talked about earlier. How do you measure impact? And, what's the approach? What approach are you taking now for some of these newer opportunities and measuring impact and change over time?
Yeah, great question. We take the what I would consider a somewhat flawed playbook of theory of change, looking at outputs, outcomes, and ultimately impact. And I think it's flawed for two reasons. But it's the best we've got right now. Um, uh, you know, Outcomes are where we can focus. So, for instance, looking at sustained wage gains, that's a positive outcome of a job placement that came as a result of a program, right? To look at the impacts of that is pretty hairy and pretty expensive, and so it's not a totally linear. What is the value derived to that individual and or their family for the sustained wage gains? Really hard to look at that because typically it's an N of one.
Mhm.
So we focus on the outcomes piece there. But what's really unfortunate, I think, in how we look at um, impact frameworks and impact measurement and management is the inherent backward-looking nature of them. And so you're looking at reports from partners that say this is what we did last year, and really I want to, you know, manage our resources like a VC that says what's the future potential of these things. I think that from a carbon reduction standpoint, we're just starting to see some interesting models for how we can assess that. There's a tool that we've actually provided some support for called Crane,
Mhm.
Carbon Reduction Assessment of New Enterprises. Um, wouldn't it be lovely if we had that for workforce development? You know,
Mhm.
what are the inputs that we could take to say, okay, based on what we know historically, if we do these things, this is the, you know, future job placements and wage gains that we could potentially expect with obviously with a discount rate, right? Um, so I'm sorry, I don't know if that answered you asked about how do we
Yeah.
look at impact measurement and management. We look at it fairly uh, conventional theory of change, but
Mhm.
I really want us to be moving into the forward-looking space.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, the predictive analysis of it, we haven't been able to do, or at least we haven't done it to the extent that we can on the workforce and education side. So we are actually
Yeah.
at JFF Labs, we're working on some of that now. So to TBD
Ooh.
on how
Oh,
we
that's
move into that. But we are our theory of change, what we believe is data and digital transformation must be part of the solution for workforce and education to transform. And we need to have predictive indicators that let us know what's working, what's not working. One, so we can double down on investments where we are seeing, and I know a lot of people hate this, the needle move, but also so we see job creation, wage, and change, and not just on an individual level, but we're looking at family sustaining jobs, right, and how that's impacting the individual and then generations. So um,
yeah.
all exciting work.
That is very exciting. We'd love to hear more about that. That's very cool, and that's the direction we need to go in. Because if we're only looking backwards, we're not looking at the future problems that we need to be addressing.
So let's then talk a little bit about, what comes under this umbrella of future of work, right? It's a really broad umbrella. I know one area, so we're looking at data. Another area is how do we design or how do we help design good quality jobs and what that means? I'm curious from your point, when you think about future of work, what sits under that?
Yeah, great question. Because everybody uses the term slightly differently to define, in some cases it's digitization or, or increased technical capabilities. When we think about future of work, our locus or our perspective is through a technology lens to say, okay, we see these technologies coming down the pipe, and what is that technology's influence on the labor market?
Mhm.
Um, and this is a mediocre example, but um, one of our biggest customer bases is architects, and historically, an architect like a Frank Gehry would think of a building in their mind. And then translate that into a digital file, or the people that work for Frank would translate that into a digital file, and those would ultimately manifest as construction documentation, and then you build the building, right, based on that. That's yesterday and today a little bit. What tomorrow looks like is um, an architect will feed in all of the necessary characteristics of a building. Say this much square foot at at this lat and longitude, this functionality, et cetera, et cetera. And an algorithm is going to spit out millions, if not billions, of design iterations that architect can then play with and interact with. That radically upends the process by which a one of our customers engages with our products. And so you really need to be putting the user or the customer at the center by thinking about how to address some of these future focused technology issues. And if you believe that that is not a great example of the workforce challenges that we're facing today, but I do think it's instructive to think about how we use technology and how technology might influence labor markets in some way. I mean, the gig economy and Uber and Lyft and how they've been able to essentially provide employment opportunities, and I use that word employment quite loosely, to millions of people is a technological innovation, right? And so we need to be thinking about the technology's impact on the workforce and how we can ensure that we're optimizing for the worker,
Yeah.
for that individual and their opportunities. Yeah. Sorry, I'm not sure if that answered your question from a technologist.
It did, and the way that you're looking at the user journey and user experience is the same way we should and ought to be looking at the worker journey and learner experience as well. So I think it's a great example. And to that, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask around how, as we're innovating and bringing new models to bear, how do we make sure we're not reinforcing systemic barriers and leaving out those historically left out and or marginalized? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, what's really interesting about what's really interesting about removing some of the walls between, uh, you know, purely corporate initiatives and philanthropic or social good initiatives opens the door to lots of new opportunities, right? And so um, when our foundation started investing in the future of work, we very quickly realized that our value proposition in that space as a corporate was very different than in our than in de-risking technologies in the climate space. And what we've done is experiment with, and this is actually manifested in our JFF relationship, connecting our resources internally for uh, Autodesk's initiatives around this space to our partners, right? And so by way of example, we are working on credentialing and learning initiatives for Autodesk products, and that is one side of the business, one technical side of the business, and then we also work with historically Black colleges and universities on our recruiting initiatives. Um, Through that work, we were able to bring those two together and say, hey, should we be piloting some of these, which with HBCUs to explore, like, give that user or give those learners the opportunity to, get access to new tools and new capabilities before everybody else.
Right.
And so the opportunity to kind of explore some of these ways by connecting the dots and reducing um, the silos in between all this work, whether it be philanthropic or
Mhm.
corporate, is, I think, really exciting. I think we have a lot more work to do there.
Yeah.
There's a lot more work to do, but we're having that conversation, which wasn't really on the table in past years.
Yeah. That's amazing. The work-based learning experience is so critical right now, and I love the fact that you're kind of marrying two sides of the business together. I think we need to see more of that with corporations. And if I can do a shameless plug for our corporate leadership team, they actually just released a Recover Stronger playbook for corporations to look at based on what they've gathered from corporations over the last 18 months or so post COVID. So I urge everyone to check that out. Lots of good insight and content in there. Um,
Can I plug it as well? I've
sure.
read it. We had the opportunity through this work to make those connections. And so one of our senior HR leaders participated in the workshops
Mhm.
around the Recover Stronger playbook. I'll also say that through our relationship with JFF, when the opportunity to join the Recover Stronger coalition was presented, we get this all the time as a corporate, and it was such a no-brainer to join. And I think we've gotten a lot of value out of it. The playbook is excellent. I was a little bit concerned about another policy guide for
Mhm.
HR professionals, and I was dead wrong. It's a brilliant asset that shows what companies can and should be doing in order to ensure that they put people at the center of the post COVID-19 recovery. And so, doubling down on what you said, it's great.
Yeah, no, it's great to have the corporate partnership in doing so and building that out. I want to pivot because we just celebrated Father's Day, and I just want to say happy first Father's Day to you. You have two new twin daughters. two new twin daughters. That's not how you say it. You have twin daughters.
We call them
um,
quarant twins. Yeah,
yes, yes.
yeah, yeah.
So I'm curious, as you think about their future, what are some things that you're thinking about now that maybe you didn't think about before? I know they're still, babies, but I'm curious if your thought process has changed at all.
Um,
Did I
I've
stump
had
you on
the
that one?
Well, no, it's a great question. It's a great question, and the journey of parenthood, which I think many of us are on, and I'm newly on, has profound implications for how we think about our place in the world and what we do um, on Earth while we're here. I'm in the incredibly lucky position to have many years ago decided I want to focus on the big societal challenges of our time, which I believe, and I've stated to you previously, are climate change and inequality. And I would say that becoming a new parent has only validated that decision and made more urgent the need to push forward solutions
Mhm.
because it's really easy to get overwhelmed by these bigger challenges that we've got as a society. And I am a skeptical optimist. I know that we can best these challenges. And I feel like having kids now, I would just want to put my foot on the gas. I don't have time to quibble about the little things. We got to fix these problems because we don't have much time left. Yeah, I think that was a response to your question.
No, I feel the same way. I've got a 14-year-old daughter and almost 13-year-old son. I feel the same. I'm like, can I push the gas any harder and, go faster? And that's why I think the partnerships are so necessary right now. And, I encourage us all to look at who we're not partnering with that we should,
Hmm.
internally in our own organizations and externally. And I think in the philanthropic world, you really put a call to action out. How can we collectively de-risk innovation and new models that we absolutely need to see the change that we want to see? And so maybe you and I could put that call to action out together and see what people say. It's a little bit different than what we've seen in the past, but it's necessary to get to, I think, where we're all striving to get to for our future.
I I think that's very well said, and I think that JFF is from our perspective, a wonderful partner in helping to pilot these new things that can go to scale, whether it's through the Employment Technology Fund, through labs, et cetera. So I think we're completely philosophically aligned and look forward to bringing others on this journey with us.
Absolutely. Good. Joe, is there any question that I didn't ask you that you wish that I'd asked?
Oh, you really asked me a lot of tough ones, Christina. So no, my you did open the door for me being able to ask you a question, and I'm curious.
Mhm.
This is how did you get your husband bought into This Is Us as a TV show? My wife would love to know.
Listen, it took a lot, in the early the early days of This Is Us, and we watch religiously together. It has become a date night for us, and right now they're obviously on hiatus, but the early days, it was sobbing every Tuesday night. And I told
Well,
my
that
husband,
maybe
I was like, if you want to spend time, this is the best time to spend, and it was really a bonding moment. And I actually wrote a blog. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. It was after season one about how
yeah.
my husband is like Jack Pearson. This is before we knew, that Jack. Well, let me not give it away if people haven't seen it, but the writing was so great. I mean, it's one of those shows that I think it's the top five shows of all time, and it was just a way for us to connect together and actually have some serious family conversation too afterwards.
So that's the opportunity there in our household is that show puts forth in some cases societal challenges, in a lot of cases like at the individual scale, and forces conversations about them. And so you know, I, one of the shows where therapy was, kind of made more real for everybody and
Absolutely.
encouraged to be used as a tool was incredibly powerful for her. So I do think that it in some way engenders empathy and
Hmm.
conversations around some of these challenges that we face as a society. And
Yeah.
that's why I wanted to bring it up. I know that you're a strong enthusiast for the show, so
I
I think it was relevant.
the way that they weaved in the COVID and the racial, challenges this last season, I thought was brilliant. Absolutely
Mm,
brilliant. It did not seem contrived at all, and I think they were particularly around the mental health
yes.
issues that people were thinking about but not talking about. And I think the way that they brought it up was just brilliant, just brilliant. So another plug for anyone who hasn't seen This Is Us, particularly this last season, you shall watch it. This is an
Yes.
unpaid commercial.
Yeah.
So
Lots of plugs to this. This has been a great conversation. I'm
yeah,
really grateful for the time and enjoyed talking to you and getting to know you, Christina. Thank you.
same Joe. I appreciate your time.